This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Morley Stone. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to IHMC. Let's all take a moment right now to either turn off or silence our cell phones so we don't interrupt our lecture tonight. IHMC is very pleased tonight to be assisting UWF with the William and Mary Smart Chemistry Lecture Series. It's my particular honor to introduce Dr. Karen Mollick, who will introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Angela Wilson. Professor Mollick is Chair and Professor of Chemistry at UWF, where she also serves as the Administrative Fellow for Student Engagement, UWF STEM Scholars Program, and Chemistry Scholars Program Director. Dr. Mollick has a PhD in Physical Chemistry from the University of Georgia and a BS in Chemistry from Mercer University. Her research areas cover several different areas, including the development of safety relay for high vacuum systems, synthesis and characterization of transition metal oxide nanoparticles, synthesis and characterization of zinc oxide quantum dots, and the development of new physical chemistry laboratory experiments for undergraduates. IHMC has a long relationship with Karen, and she was instrumental in working on the creation of the Joint Intelligent Systems and Robotics PhD program with IHMC and UWF, and it's hard to believe it now boasts 24 students. Dr. Mollick is the recipient of numerous honors and awards, and we haven't even touched on the passion that she brings to the classroom and working with students. At the conclusion of this lecture, we'll have time for questions. I would just ask that you would wait for the microphone before asking your question so that everybody has a chance to hear both the question and the answer. So now please give me a warm welcome to bring Karen Mollick up to the stage to introduce our speaker. All yours, Karen.
Thank you, Morley. And thank you to IHMC. This has been a long-running collaboration between UWF and IHMC. And I want to take a moment just to tell you a little bit about Bill and Mary Smart. It was Bill's dream that we would bring cutting-edge scientists to Pensacola. And what he knew and was excited about was the interface of both the community aspect of bringing cutting-edge scientists to Pensacola and the university aspect. And so in 2005, they made a very generous $100,000 endowment donation that set up the William D. Smart Seminar Lecture Series. And so it is my distinct honor to introduce to you the 2023 William D. Smart Seminar speaker, Dr. Angela Wilson. Dr. Wilson is from Michigan State University. And you know there's not a lot of accolades when I had to condense them and still write them down to make sure that I did not forget any of them. So I have a couple questions for her, one of which is, does she sleep? And the second of which is she just glutton for punishment? And here's why. Because she is the John A. Hanna Distinguished Professor at Michigan State University. She's the Associate Dean for Strategic Initiatives in the College of Natural Sciences. She's the Director of the Center for Quantum Computing. She is the past president, 2022, of the American Chemical Society. If you do not know much about ACS, it's the largest scientific society in the nation with roughly 170,000 members. Now you're beginning to understand why I wonder if she sleeps and if she's glutton for punishment, right? She's a fellow in APS, American Physical Society, ACS, and AAAS. Again, I'm not sure where we find more than 24 hours in the day, but I need to know how we do that. She has hundreds of accolades and awards, of course, also publications, and she's a leader in the field of quantum computing. I am excited about personally meeting her as well because she has ties to our area. And for those of you who do not know much about the SMART series, this series is helpful and enjoyable for community and faculty. It is revolutionary for students. And there are many reasons for that, one of which is oftentimes these seminar speakers open their lab up to our research students. They are invited to do research over the summer. Now imagine, our students are highly, highly capable. They oftentimes have not had the same opportunity as many other students at other schools. And so now all of a sudden, labs are opened up that they never dreamed of. That is life-changing. And so what I really appreciate about the SMART series is the community and the faculty aspect, but also how it changes student lives. So without further ado, no pressure at all, right? But I do really have a question. Do you sleep? I just need to know. That's a good answer. I like that. So it is my absolute honor to tell you thank you for accepting our invitation for the 2022 and on kind of short notice, right? After you met AJ, he came back and he was super excited that he met you. And we all said, yes, we have to invite her. So thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you for engaging with the community tonight. And then tomorrow, you are all invited to UWF if you'd like to listen to her science talk in the chemistry department. So Dr. Angela Wilson, let's please give her a warm welcome.
Well, first of all, it was certainly, I really appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the introduction by Karen. Thank you so much. And I very much appreciate this organization for hosting me tonight. Very much. I've had a wonderful visit. It's so amazing what is being done in terms of robotics. Just absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much for the wonderful tour and wonderful visit. So it was not hard for me to say yes to Pensacola. I have a little bit of history here. I've been coming here for about 4 decades. I went to high school in Enterprise, Alabama. I don't know if anyone here is from Alabama, so anyways. And my parents are snowbirds, and so I spend every single Christmas here, although I must say it's in Destin. But I've always, and I've spent a lot of time. I go to Pensacola Naval Station, Eglin Air Force Base, and Hilbert Field because my father was career Air Force, and he was an Air Force pilot. And so often would go stop at the bases, and I'm sorry, I'm used to saying bases, being an Air Force brat. So anyways, it's really great to be back here, to be in the area, such a wonderful place. And so I do have a few questions for you before I get started, because this is going to be kind of dependent upon some of the stories I'm going to tell you today. First of all, any chemists in the audience? Wow. Uh-oh. Maybe I should switch to my technical talk. Anyone with connections to Navy, Air Force, all that? Okay, I've got some stories for you then. Okay, terrific. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Chemical engineers. Okay, all right. So I'm sorry. So being president of the American Chemical Society, there's chemical engineers in there too. So I just used chemical scientists very broadly. So yes, I didn't mean to forget the chemical engineers. So any physicist? Okay, I'm with you. I'm a chemical physicist. Anyways, so I'm going to tell you a few stories tonight, and I think it's going to be a little bit of nostalgia. And so as I go through a little bit, because I really want to bring to the point how computing is changing the world and how the world would be changed by computing, kind of from the chemist viewpoint, I think it's important to go back into history a little bit. And so I'm going to reflect on a few systems that existed some time ago. And maybe some of you might be willing to raise your hand if you've ever worked on some of these, because you may have some interesting stories and comments afterwards as well. So we know that computing has had some amazing changes throughout the world, an amazing historical context. Everything from helping place a man on the moon to looking at the Human Genome Project to the amazing work that is being done here in the robotics laboratories. Absolutely incredible work. But I'm going to step back a few paces, quite a bit of paces. Because I think when we look at the future, it's important to see where we've come from. And relatively quickly, I know some of the younger students here aren't going to think this was so quick, but truly it is quick because we're on an even more accelerated pathway as we look in terms of what's going on with computing and artificial intelligence these days and how it's going to impact and how it is impacting fields like chemistry and other fields. So long ago, and I'm not going to ask if anyone was around for this one, but the digital analyzer to differential analyzer, this was one of the very first type of computing systems. The capabilities were plus or minus, roots of polynomials, and this thing differential analyzer was introduced back in 1931. And it kind of followed some equipment by James Thomson in 1876. But we've progressed a lot since then. World War II, Why did we need computers? For World War II, the military wanted more and better ways for doing trajectory tables for artillery. The Army used a pair of mechanical differential analyzers, and by 1943, they were so far behind schedule that they needed to have some other way to try to help do these trajectory tables. They came up with the ENIAC, this electron numerator, integrator, and computer. And this thing, you could do plus or minus, you could do less than or equal to, you could add, subtract, multiply, divide, and store up to 20 10-digit decimal numbers and square roots. I bet most of you have more than 10, 20 10-digit decimal numbers on your cell phones with even your phone books, right? So, but the features, it was 30 tons, mere small system, 30 separate units, 200 kilowatts of power, and you had to kind of hardwire, had to move the do the hardwire, and that's how you programmed it. It wasn't just play with your little Apple Watch. And so pretty amazing, and it was really kind of the most complex equipment to that day. The EDVAC then, a little bit better, electronic discrete variable arithmetic computer, and for this one you could actually store some instruction. Instruction tape was in the memory. You could issue instructions at electronic speed. This one only took up 500 square feet of space. Not as big as the condo bigger than the condo I was in last night. Anyways, 7 feet tall, and you could change the external hardwire of the system again. Fast forward a little bit more. Anyone recognize these? Punch cards. Anyone use them? Yeah, thank you for admitting that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, and if you have them, they're like museum pieces now. They're pretty fascinating. If you ever have them, bring them to one of these and show some of the students, because I think they'd be absolutely amazed to see some of these things. Because long ago, the computer instructions weren't just kind of typing them in after the hardwiring experience. You had to use these cards. They almost look like these index cards. They're a little bit bigger than that. And they had all the instructions on this. And so the control was using these instruction punch cards. Well, how many of you ever got your punch cards out of order? Because all the instructions had to be in order. Oh, yeah. Yep. John Popel, who won the 1998 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, told me he once dropped a box of 2,000 cards. He still got the Nobel Prize. But, people learned to number them and do all kinds of strategies because they had to be in order. And then, did they ever get stuck in the machine? And then they went flying all over the place? Yeah, okay. So not exactly the easiest way of doing instructions. And so, that was always kind of amusing if it was somebody else's cards, but not so amusing if it was your cards. It was kind of a destroyed day. But these systems, though, the UNIVAC then, this system was 2.25 tons, okay? 1968, $1.6 million, today's equivalent of about $12 million, 1.3 megahertz CPU. Can we even envision working on a computer that slow these days? Oh, you can? Oh, boy. Okay. 1/2 megabyte of RAM. We complain if we don't have 32 or 16 or whatever. 100 megabyte hard drive. Many of us have 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte, right? The Apple 7 watch, look in comparison. Some very significant changes. And many of us in this room have seen some of these changes through the years and how computing has evolved. Oops. Oh, sorry. Don't worry. I will explain the equation, and I've only got 2. But computers and chemistry, and how did that come about? Well, first of all, scientists were so excited about the possibility of having the potential value of these various types of computing machines through the years, rapid solution of critical problems. And I'll tell you why it was so important in chemistry in a minute. Physicists were actually some of the earliest users of computing machines. If you've seen the movie Oppenheimer, computing was a very important piece of that for work on the hydrogen bomb. The first chemist to recognize the potential value of computing machines were actually the quantum chemists, people like me. We really needed to have some high-powered computing. The reason for that, don't panic. I'm not going to pull a theoretical chemist move on you and show you all equations the rest of this talk. But this is very important because this is the fundamental equation of quantum mechanics. If you solve this equation, then you can figure out how much energy does it take to make a molecule break apart. How much energy does it take to bring two molecules together and make some sort of compound that we may be using as some sort of commercial product? These are all types of questions that we can answer using this equation, the Schrödinger equation. And what it does is it just simply describes how electrons, nuclei. Don't worry, I'm not going to continue to go down this pathway, but how these all interact. How do things within a molecule interact, and how do molecules interact with one another? The challenge is this equation is so difficult to solve exactly. You cannot solve it exactly except for one electron, like a hydrogen atom, basically, these days. Even today, on today's most powerful computers. And so this is a real challenge, and this tells you a little bit about why we needed to have some sort of computers to help us out. So 1929, Paul Dirac, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1933, shared with Erwin Schrödinger. Schrödinger is kind of the father of quantum mechanics, says that the underlying physical laws necessary for basically to kind of understand chemistry and physics basically are completely known. And the only difficulty is the math is just too difficult to solve. It's so difficult. Even there's no way we can solve it. Okay? Well, was he right? He kind of was, because we can only solve things for one electron system, even on the world's most powerful computers now. But also no, in the fact that we've got a lot of different ways to approximate this. And we have computing technology that continues to evolve and allows us to solve all kinds of problems. And I'll give you a couple examples today. So in the 1940s, the question was, can you do these accurate calculations? Well, we can do some nice calculations if we kind of mix some results with experiment, okay? But even then, things were still pretty difficult. How difficult were these problems? Just an example. In 1955, small molecule, 2 nitrogens, 2 atoms, early on in the periodic table, pretty simple systems. And they were trying to solve the Schrödinger equation with a lot of approximations. And it took him and 2 students, basically, and simple primitive calculators those days, 2 years to solve the problem, just to predict how much energy does it take to break this apart. 2 years. Okay. So at that point, people started using computers. Okay. And still the thought was they're too difficult, things are too difficult to solve by hand. So we've got to figure out a different way to do things. In 1950, Rutan from University of Chicago developed a way that we could basically start using some of these computing machines. And in 1956, some further work was done. And anytime the group had to use a computer, they had to fly to Chicago to Dayton, Ohio, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to try to use a UNIVAC. So not exactly easy times at all. But this was kind of the first start of some of the kind of the introduction of computing in chemistry. In 1966, Robert Mulliken, who won the Nobel Prize, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech said, "I would like to emphasize strongly my belief in the era of computing chemists, when hundreds, if not thousands, of chemists will go to the computing machine instead of the laboratory, for many facets of information is already at hand." Well, he was kind of early in his prediction, but these days, there are many of us who do computational chemistry. We now do a lot of work in artificial intelligence. There's so many different ways we can bring computing into solving chemical problems, and I'll give you a couple examples. So I'm going to go back to this calculation from on N2, where they were doing it by hand and it took them 2 years. Even by 1966, even with the relatively simple computers at the time, solving that problem only took 2 minutes. These days, you can do it in a fraction of a second. So we've certainly evolved. And think forward in terms of all the new developments. I'll talk about some of them that are going on in the world now. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, I'll talk a little bit about that. We've got a lot of things that are going to happen very quickly, and the whole paradigm of a lot of our universe, not only in terms of research, but in terms of products, in terms of banking, in terms of security, a lot of things are going to change very substantially and very quickly. So the early age of computational chemistry, There was challenges in terms of hardware access, trying to use punch cards, trying to find time on computers. There was a lot of different challenges. Computer graphics came into the picture, and that opened up a lot of new ways of trying to do modeling and trying to build molecules and try to understand them. And we really have come a long way. I'm sure if we look at that chart, many of us, I can see some of the things. I remember the 5-inch floppy disk. I'm sure some of you remember those. The reel tape, a lot of different things. The first Mac, the Macs, the Mac Classics, a lot of different things. And now we're in the world of, these lovely little Apple Watches and so many other wonderful tools and our cell phones and all of that. Now, computational chemistry. There's a lot of different areas. I'm not going to throw out all these acronyms, but we can use it as an interpretive tool to interpret a lot of different types of things about science, and I'll share some of those with you today. We can predict things, everything from new drugs to new types of molecules, new types of products. I'll give you some example. And we can also confirm experiments. If experiments are seeing something unusual, we can certainly delve into that. One of my areas is in quantum mechanics method development. And if you'd like to see a little bit more about that, I will not go through all the equations tomorrow either, but I do a lot of work on equations. But today I'm going to tell you some other stories rather than go through all the equations. So just trust me, miracles occur and we can do great things with computers. So I got into computation many years ago because of the versatility, because of the great range of types of problems we can look at, lots of different things we can do, everything from coding, looking at new properties, to really understanding molecules. And the other reason many of my students tell me they get into computational chemistry is because then they don't have to spend time, like at the pictures on the right, late nights in the lab. Instead, there are all kinds of pictures on the left in terms of what they're doing in terms of research at night. But anyways. So really I got into the field many years ago. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side with all the dirt and these tanks, I got my career start at Hanford Nuclear Reservation, Pacific Northwest National Lab. It is one of the biggest contamination sites in the world in terms of a lot of nuclear waste has been buried there. I won't blame it on the chemical engineers, but it wasn't the chemists either. That really had put many different types of radioactive materials in these tanks, sealed them up. These tanks have 6-foot thick concrete walls. Some of them have 2 6-foot thick concrete walls. And the challenge is they were only expecting these tanks to last 20 or 30 years. We're really far beyond that, okay? What has happened now is that some of these tanks, they're buried underground. Some of these tanks have cracked, okay? And when I was an undergraduate student, they had more PhD computational chemists working there than anywhere else in the world because they were trying to figure out how in the world are we going to understand this environmental problem? Because that nuclear waste, they didn't know what had transpired within those tanks. They didn't know what was in the tanks for sure, what had transpired in those tanks. And if they're cracking, they're leaking into the soil, into the groundwater. And by the way, this is right next to the Columbia River. Columbia River, of course, is a major tributary of the Pacific Ocean. Big major problem. And every time they try to take a sample of these tanks or it's very, very expensive process. They have many experimentalists working on this, lots of different scientists and engineers in different areas. But to try to speed up, trying to understand what was going on and really trying to understand that, they hired many, many people like me and others to really work on trying to develop methods and strategies to try to understand what in the world was going on and how could they stop this flow of nuclear waste into the groundwater, into the soil, and towards the river, okay? But that is just one way that computational chemists are being used. Another way is if you look at the top, you see this time and money. What are we talking about? Drug discovery. Okay? We know the cost of drugs are really, really expensive, okay? I never was involved in drug discovery until about 15 years ago. And all of a sudden now, I understand why drug discovery is very expensive and why our drugs are so incredibly expensive. I have been working with a pharmaceutical company now for 15 years. And we finally got our very first product approved by the FDA back in February, okay? 15 years of research and development, taking hundreds of people, hundreds of millions of dollars in investment to try to get to some drugs that help with things like end-stage kidney failure, and a number of other cancers and other types of disease, okay? It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. And what you're looking for is a needle in a haystack. And so what we're trying to do with computational methods, you can't identify, unfortunately, the miracle drug, because if you could, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be rich. I'd go have one of those fancy condos on Destin or Pensacola. Anyways, but what you can certainly do is you can reduce the size of that haystack. In terms of, what do experimentalists need to look at? What do your colleagues need to look at to try to identify what's working, what's useful in terms of drug discovery? There's a lot of other ways that it's useful, particularly in areas where there's a lot of, explosives, radioactive materials, other areas, very useful to use computational methods. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about some of the challenges in quantum mechanics in terms of, how to make it useful, what, computer time memory disk space. Why does it take so much time? Why does it cost so much? So I'll talk about some of that in enabling new science tomorrow. But today, I'm going to talk about kind of a glimpse into the practical. I'm going to talk a little bit about how computational chemistry is making a difference towards problems of today. Okay? So a number of years ago, I got a phone call. It was a phone call from an environmental engineer. Okay? I'm a theoretical chemist. And this call was basically, can you tell me how far do I need to dig to remove PFAS from the soil? And I'm like, I'm sorry, what's PFAS? I know a lot more about it. I'm going to tell you a little bit, talk about that today. But what's PFAS? And I thought, why in the world are you calling me? This is really bizarre because I'm a theoretical chemist, but I thought, I'm just going to listen. I'm going to hear him out. I've never gotten a call like this before. And then actually about 2 weeks later, there was actually this big PFAS conference in Michigan, and it was people from waste management, from water treatment facilities and many other facilities, but surprisingly not a chemist or chemical engineer in the room. And they're trying to solve what I view as a chemistry problem, okay? They're throwing all these crazy things at it, and I'm like, that won't work. That won't work. We're spending how much money trying to deal with this problem that's a chemistry problem? We've got to get chemistry in the picture. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to delve into this because we certainly need to have, there's a lot of chemists looking at it. We need to have a lot more. I guess we need to have another chemist looking at it. But what is it? So PFAS, these really interesting substances, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, they have some really crazy, interesting structures in the fact that they're both hydrophobic and hydrophilic. What does that mean? They love water, they hate water, they love oil, and they don't like oil. So very interesting properties. But what, in terms of commercially, in terms of the products in our home, probably the carpeting we're on and the chairs you're sitting, anyways, are non-stick and water resistant. So some very interesting properties. What do you find them in? These things, Scotchgard, I bet you can't find that on the market anymore, okay? I put Glide Dental Floss. I'm not throwing them under the bus. I still use the stuff, but it does have PFAS on it. Fast food containers, popcorn, microwavable popcorn. On the right, if you go to the store, you see these pans. They say PFOA free, okay? Why? That's Teflon, okay? That is one of the PFAS compounds, okay? Wolverine boots, these are made in Michigan, okay? These also were known to have a lot of PFAS. They're in all different types of products, just about every cosmetic. I was just at Dow Chemical last week, and they're kind of panicking about some of the stuff they use in terms of PFAS. In every single cosmetic, shampoos, conditioners, upholstery, anything that's kind of water repellent, okay? Water resistant, okay? So it's in a lot of different stuff. It's also in firefighting foam, okay? And it's also in things like car wash foam. Car wash, a lot of places now have changed what they use, but for a while it was in a lot of car wash foam. So I like to fish, okay? If you try to go fishing in Michigan, these days you have this sign in many different spots that says, do not eat the fish, okay? State of Michigan has a lot of different advisories in terms of PFAS, okay? You can swim, boat, and catch, but, and you can touch the water, but you don't want to eat the fish, okay? There's some studies that have shown if you have Great Lakes fish 5 times a year, that can significantly increase the PFAS in your blood. Before you panic and say, how can I avoid it? Every single person in this room has already got PFAS in our bodies. So just put that out there, okay? But Sometimes chemistry is not necessarily featured the best. If you want to see the story, I don't know if you've seen the movie Erwin Schrödinger many years ago about the chromium-6 problem of PPG. There's a movie out, and it's based upon a documentary, and it follows the documentary quite well about the PFAS challenges that came out in the PFAS problem was in 1998. The movie came out several years ago called Dark Waters. So if you want to hear a little bit more about the story, I encourage you to take a look at the movie and just realize that the people that they're talking about there are in areas of very, very, very significant contamination, okay? They were actually working at the chemical facility, and those are the people that are in the story, okay? And some of the people in that surrounding community. You do not have a big PFAS facility like that here, okay? But it is a global issue. I'm going to start off with one of the things, the reason why I point out Erwin Schrödinger is because Erwin Schrödinger has actually gotten involved in the PFAS contamination in Australia. Over 40,000 people were involved in a class action suit over PFAS contamination. I'm sure you heard about a week or two ago, there was a lot of things in the news about 3M. 3M recently had to just settle for over $1 billion in settlement. And I feel bad for the chemists who work there now, but there indeed have been some challenges through the years. You can see a lot of headlines, and if you think it's only Michigan, it's all over the world. And if you look, there's some issues there. You see Florida as well. And one of the challenges is, so in Michigan, one of the biggest sites is Wordsworth Air Force Base. And I love the Air Force. Air Force brat, I was Air Force wife, all of that. But one of the challenges was the firefighting foam. People didn't know, and they were using the firefighting foam. And the problem is the firefighting foam, you often use it for different types of military exercises, with the planes and this, that, and the other. And what happened is that some of this soaked in actually into where the water table was, okay? And then there was no filtering mechanisms in place. And so there are some challenges there in terms of PFAS. People are working around the world diligently trying to address the PFAS challenges. I just was at Dow Chemical last week, and they are very significantly looking at, they're not producing the PFAS, but they do use it, and so they are looking very diligently at how replacement compounds, how can we deal with some of the challenges. You can see here some of the bigger sites, and you can see stories in the paper, are Eglin Air Force Base, Pensacola Naval Station, and Hubert. And Hurlburt, okay, field, thank you. So those are some of the biggest locations, and it's nothing against the military. DoD is working very hard to address these problems. We have some funding from DOE, EPA, and DoD looking at some of these challenges. What happens, okay? There's a number of different challenges in terms of health-wise, and you can read all types of stories, and some of them are truly linked, and some of them are still a lot of fallacy at this point, okay? Some things that have been shown is that there can be high levels of PFAS, can result in things like decreased vaccine response in children, decreased infant birth weights, some different types of cancers, increased cholesterol levels. There's a long, long list of different potential problems. These chemicals are resistant to chemical, biological, and physical degradation processes, which used to be thought of as being quite positive, and so they were called forever chemicals. But now, because of some of the challenges, they're calling them zombie chemicals. They've been used since 1940s and 1950s in many, many of our products. Now, a few of these are being banned, and I was just in Europe, and they're talking about in 2025 possibly banning over 12,500 compounds. And so that's going to impact a lot of different products. Unfortunately, the US often doesn't stop the imports of things like that, but certainly in terms of what we can manufacture and make in the US. 12,500, I don't believe that every single one of these compounds is a problem. And so there's many of us that are doing a lot of work trying to understand what is a problem and what is not a problem. So some of the things we do is we do a lot of work looking at proteins. We can use a lot of the methods we use for things like drug design, and we try to identify which proteins that are kind of involved in different types of disease might actually be impacted by different types of PFAS. Which PFAS are safer, which ones are more challenging, and we're also trying to link kind of what products are some of these things in, okay? We also, because there are so many compounds, there's so many proteins, there's a lot that we need to try to understand, my group is also doing a lot of work trying to really understand using AI, machine learning, and trying to understand, are there some safer alternatives? And so we've done some work in this area. And so we have identified some potential species that are actually could potentially be quite interesting to industry, but also are potentially much safer compounds as well. And so we've done a lot of work like this, and we're continuing to do a lot of work like this. We basically generated a list of over 260,000 possible PFAS compounds, and kind of are building from there. We're doing a lot of work looking at soils. We're looking at a lot of work at PFAS and how it moves in soils, how its presence in fish, how can we detect it, how can we understand some of the interactions for that. So this is one way. It's kind of a sad story in terms of PFAS, but I can tell you that many people, our scientists, are really working on it. Chemical companies are being very diligent about trying to address these problems. It is a global problem, but don't panic when you do hear about it. Do know that we are looking at mitigation strategies. There's a lot of people that say, oh, all these chemicals are a problem. They're not all a problem. There are some that are a problem, but they're not all a problem. But we're using computational chemistry to address some of these challenges. We've also done some work looking at things like CO2 mitigation, and we've been trying to, Mother Nature fixes, basically addresses CO2 using different types of plants, unfortunately not quite efficiently enough. And so we've also done some work trying to identify, are there some other proteins that we could possibly modify to try to address PFAS or absorb PFAS better than basically how Mother Nature does this. And so we did some work on that. We've done some work on that through the years as well. We've also done a lot of work, I've told you already, in terms of a pharmaceutical company, and we're really doing a lot of work with Reata Pharmaceuticals. They were just bought by Biogen, or in the process of being bought by Biogen, but we're doing a lot of work looking at things like arthritis, looking at multiple sclerosis, I can't even speak today, chronic kidney disease, and other types of diseases. We're also doing a lot in terms of tuberculosis, and I'll tell you a little bit about that shortly, why we're even interested in that. And we're really trying to understand things like, what triggers cancer in terms of within DNA, and we've done some work in that as well. So with tuberculosis, if you look, the US, we have hardly any cases of tuberculosis, but if you look in parts of Africa, tuberculosis is still a very substantial disease. It's still the leading infectious disease killer in the world. About 6 in 10 cases go untreated. The TB therapy lasts from 6 months to longer than 2 years, and it's really hard to follow the protocols. The protocols are pretty intense. 6 months of injections one day for at least 6 months. This is really difficult in parts of Africa. Or 9 to 24 months of 12 to 24 pills a day. Yeah, no one wants to do that. Can you imagine how hard that is on your, on other parts of your body? IV infusions, 2 a day for 6 to 24 months, not happening. And it takes 14,000 pills to treat one patient with drug-resistant tuberculosis. And so we have been working with the team, really trying to, and some of these actually have very serious side effects. And so it's really hard to access the testing, the treatment, and all of that in different rural areas. The cost of treatment is also very high, so who's footing that bill in Africa, okay? A non-compliance can help trigger the disease-resistant tuberculosis, and which then takes even longer to treat. So we're doing a lot of work. Unfortunately, I can't share all that with you other than tell you that we are doing a lot of work trying to address some of these challenges in terms of, what molecules might be good and why for tuberculosis treatment. We've made some really substantial steps. We have quite a bit of NIH funding and Health in Action funding to really try to move some of this forward. So I started off talking a little bit about technology. And technology continues to evolve quite substantially. And I mentioned Moore's law here. And by the way, Moore was a chemist, if you didn't know that. And so I'm sure many of you have seen this. It's basically the number of transistors on integrated circuit chips, how it changed from 1971 to 2018. And basically, the Moore's law basically says that the number of transistors on the circuits doubles approximately every 2 years, okay? But we see at the top of that starts to slow down a little bit. And if so, of course, we've been thinking about what kind of new technologies are there. And so the clock speed, power flattening are a couple of other areas that started to become challenging. Okay, so I'm sure many of you have heard a lot about quantum computing. What is this? Okay, so you can think of quantum computers as, you talk about qubits. What the heck is a qubit? Okay, we talk about a bit for a computer, and a bit basically when you deal with a computer, things are on or off. That's it. Okay, but you can think of basically what a quantum computer does. You can think of, rather than just on or off with a light switch, you put a dimmer on it. And now you can have many different types of light, okay? And that's essentially what your qubit is doing. It's providing you with a lot of other ways you can kind of access what the fundamentals, the foundation of computers. And so there's a lot of work going on in this area. There's a lot of different types of quantum computers that are evolving. If you want to play, there is an IBM computer that you can actually go to their website and you can actually play with a kind of a simulator of a quantum computer. Anyone in the public can do that. It's kind of fun to do that if you want to learn a little bit about that, some of the technology that's evolving. And so there's many different types of quantum computers. And so not sure which one is going to emerge as kind of the route to go. But there are a number of different computers that do have, that are available now. I'm actually working a fair amount with this, with the picture on the right, this MSU. I'm on the board of AeroQ, which is a hardware, room temperature hardware qubit system. Okay. What does it look like? We're back to the days of like the room-sized computers. We thought we were back to this, but now we're back to these huge rooms, okay? And this is what it looks like on the inside. It's kind of interesting. But why is it so amazing? I'm going to give a couple of examples here, okay? We could do something like looking at these protein structures and look at them with a lot more high-level methods, like and really kind of speed up drug discovery very substantially and really understand drug discovery a lot more. We can do a lot in terms of quantum encryption, data information, cybersecurity, okay? Chemical and engineering news, I have to point this out, called computational chemistry, the killer app for quantum computing, and part of it's kind of the drug discovery angle. But how much faster are they, okay? Here's an example. If you look at a supercomputer versus quantum computer, the Summit computer at the time of this was the fastest computer in the world. The time to complete they did this kind of approximate calculation, okay? For this particular calculation that they were looking at, it would have taken 10,000 years for this computer to complete. If you look at this rather simple quantum system, it basically took the same computation 3 minutes. And that tells you a little bit about what's kind of on the horizon in terms of computing. It's not here yet, okay? Now you still, classical computers are still faster, okay? But it's certainly on the horizon. And especially those of you who are students, I encourage you to learn as much as you can about quantum computing, because I think you're going to see it become a reality within the next 10 or so years. And so it's going to really kind of change the world of encryption, of modeling, of so many different things. Your watch, what you can do with that, all of that. And just a few things in terms of hype versus reality, okay? Faster than supercomputers, not yet, okay? Drug discovery, not yet. Cybersecurity, not yet. Quantum iPhone, wouldn't that be awesome? Not yet. Laptop, Alexa, none of that yet. Reality, it's good at a made-up task, okay? You can do some pretty small molecules with it, and you're kind of back in the primitive days of the 1960s with that kind of level of approximations, but you can do it. Right now we've got some systems with a little over 100 qubits, but you really need millions of qubits. And not yet, there's this thing about Schrödinger's cat I'm not going to go into, but anyways, no, we can't do Schrödinger's equation yet. So there's a lot of challenges ahead. Know this is on the horizon, and know this is going to open up some really cool doors actually for all of us. But some things that, national security, a lot of other things, we really want to be first we definitely need to be first at really making these things happen. Okay, so indeed, there's an incredible future in terms of computing, in terms of quantum computing, AI, machine learning. Lots of challenges for us to address, a lot of challenges that we are addressing now. And I wanted to stop and acknowledge some of the great people in my group. And I'm going to follow on what Karen said. I always welcome visiting students in my research group. I do have support. Reach out to me. Always happy to host visiting students. So thank you so much for your attention. More than happy to answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions? We're in the back. All right, ready? Good luck. You got to catch this microphone.
Oh, wow.
Told her I wasn't throwing it.
Okay, so this is about the Chinese effort. It's a pretty famous effort. How does that compare to the U.S. effort? Is the U.S. government putting enough resources in there? And a lot of stuff in the Chinese efforts for things seem to be overblown and turned into non-starters. So how does our effort and their effort compare?
So I really appreciate that question. I'm going to put on a different hat because I used to be head of the chemistry division of the U.S. National Science Foundation, okay? And a big challenge there is, you know, we looked at China basically in 2017 or 16, first surpassed us in terms of research and development expenditures. And they're on this trajectory. When I was at a National Science Foundation, we were like this for about 15 years. So the cost of science goes up and all of that. The U.S. needs to make much more substantial investments in science and R&D towards quantum computing, towards some of these technologies. They're absolutely important, so incredibly important to our future national security and so many other avenues. One of the challenges is, though, when I worked for the federal government, those of us who work for the federal government cannot go knock on the doors of our legislators and say, hey, can you please put more money on this? It's against the law. And so the only way that we can get more investments is if our legislators are hearing us talk about, hey, we want to see more investments in these areas. It is up to us. Right before the pandemic, I went in to speak to, I was not working for NSF at the time. Right before the pandemic, I went in, I spoke to a member of the House of Representatives. And she pulled me aside afterwards. We met in a group of about 5 of us met with her. She pulled me aside afterwards and said, you know, she said, science has now become a special interest. The scientists need to be here knocking on the doors and talking to members of, and getting the public involved, and talking to, you know, and really advocating for support of science. And that was frightening. The pandemic has come, and so there was certainly some change of viewpoint during that period in time, but we need to make sure that it doesn't slip back. I'm really worried about, I've been to China multiple times. I've got many colleagues in China. As president of the American Chemical Society, I'm aware of a lot of things going on in China. And I can tell you that their investments are real and they're very, very substantial. I'm concerned, I'll just put it that way.
Okay, we had one up here too.
Okay. Hello, my name is Savannah. I'm a student at UWF for clinical lab science, but I am active duty military, so I deal with public health, so CDC, EPA, OSHA, all of that stuff. So when you were talking about the PFSAs and the military stuff, I just had questions about that. The first question is this something that you think that we need to put onto we need to be putting on our trackers to be tracking these soldiers in a sense of these conservation programs for these PFAS. I can't talk like you today.
Yeah, so, There's now blood tests available to detect some of them. The problem, it doesn't detect everything, but I know that there have been some sites, and I know DoD has done some studies where they have gone in and they have been doing blood samples and all of that, kind of trying to keep track of some of this. The problem is we don't really know. PFAS can be airborne. It can be, you get it through the food packaging. You can get it through the water you're so there's so many different ways that people are being exposed. And so there's a lot more studies that are going on. There's thousands of studies, and DoD has been very good supporter of looking at these studies, and NIH and DOE and all these other agencies. And so there's a lot more work that needs to be done trying to figure out which of these are coming in, which way, and how much is too much. EPA knows a little bit, but there's a lot more work going on. And so I don't think we're at the point where everyone needs to have a sensor. If they're worried, then maybe a test. But I can tell you that some of the sites in Florida are not, they're bad for Florida, but they're not the worst. And people haven't done a lot of studies in terms of the food packaging and all of that. I mean, how much fast food do people eat? And so there's a lot of other ways that the testing and understanding needs to happen. So no panic. It's just something that we are needing to address quickly. One of the things that my research group and a few other groups have begun to look at is the fact that PFAS is in all of us, and it usually is in our body for 3 to 9 years, some of the PFAS, what we understand. And so we are looking at possible in vivo solutions. And I don't mean some crazy new drug. If you took L-carnitine, for instance, will help block some channels. Not all. Don't everyone go to the GNC and buy some. But we are finding that there are some possible routes that are kind of natural routes that we could possibly try to block it. But there's so much more work that's going on. This is a pretty new area of research because people didn't really realize how much of a problem this was until just past, less than 10 years. So, and I would say a lot over the past 4 or 5.
Okay, and another question is, based off of the military and the military alone, because I can't speak for everyone here, but what do you think is the most high-risk population within the military communities within specific military occupations?
Which is what? I'm sorry?
I said, what would you classify, or which target area would you deem a high risk for a specific military operation, like the jobs?
Oh, in terms of PFAS?
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of PFAS, I don't know what foams are being used now, but those who have used some of those firefighting foams, because that stuff can go airborne, and so they've inhaled some of that.
Got you. Okay, thank you.
Rob, did you have a question?
Yeah, we were talking about China and their technology level. I was wondering, what is their concern of PFAS, if any, because we get so much stuff from China and we use it and we throw it in the dump, which is next to rivers a lot of times.
Yeah, one of the challenges is that the regulations are not the same across the globe. And so that was, that's one of my concerns, that if like Europe is talking about trying to ban over 12,500 compounds, which is crazy because some of these things are used in drug discovery, making drugs and they help us develop a lot of our commercial products, even as catalyst, And so I know Dow is panicking, and they're we're trying to go to electric batteries, right? And so PFAS is a part of some of the coatings around electric batteries. And so there's not a whole lot of discussion on that and what we're going to do about that. So, yeah, one of my concerns is that if we do, Europe is talking about much more substantial bans than the U.S. is. The U.S. is I like the U.S. approach in terms of we're trying to understand which ones are a problem and just going as quickly as we can and then taking care of that at the time, instead of just kind of this blanket ban, which would really impact a lot of industry, a lot of products. But anyways, my concern is that, are we going to regulate what's going on in terms of imports? For a lot of other things that have been, contaminants, we don't always know what's happened on that end of things, and that worries me a lot. So yeah, that's a big challenge. Yep.
Hello.
I don't see where the square is.
Well, they
oh,
gave
there's
us a
okay.
microphone. They gave us a microphone instead.
Okay.
It's who for. On a fun note, are you a secret guilty Big Bang Theory watcher?
So my neighbor, when I lived in Texas, was an engineer. And he said, I just love this show. He said, do you watch it? And I said, I live it every day, so no, I don't watch it.
Well, you are definitely a great representation for women. I worked in a non-traditional field as well, so you've been a pleasure for all of us.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for
Appreciate
coming
that.
to speak to us.
Appreciate
On a more
that.
serious note, sort of dovetailing with the other gentleman's question about China, because unless you're under a rock somewhere, it's a huge concern. And what is the prevalence that, I know you can only speak so much because of where your resources come from, of there being, whether they are well established or the new big brains on the block, that the Chinese are, for a lack of a better term, abducting individuals, being kept against their will, so to speak, secretly, and the threat being no different than what happens in many gangs or other parts of the world, that they will threaten to do something to your family if you don't do what we want.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know how much of that goes on. I do have a Chinese postdoc in my research group, and I've had a number of Chinese students through the years, and they've opened up about a lot of things, but have never talked about anything along those lines. You know, there's a lot going on in China, indeed, but I do think that we, at least right now, some of what I'm seeing on the because I'm part of a very large quantum collaboratory with several major universities and a lot of companies. And I can tell you that I think that we are on the right track, and we've got some pretty amazing facilities and discoveries that are happening. And I'm hoping that we win this. I'm confident that we are making some amazing progress, and we have attracted some of the best minds in the world to work on this technology. So I'm hoping we'll be ahead and stay ahead. And thankfully, you know, the U.S. government has certainly put money into quantum computing, very substantial. And I can tell you that there are a lot of angel investors that have put a fortune into quantum computing. And, you know, and that's also very, very helpful.
All right, we have time for one more question. Karen?
I had a question about, I understand that as a government employee, you couldn't go and knock on the legislature's doors. Will you put back on your president of the ACS hat and talk about strides that ACS is making toward those initiatives?
Yeah, so American Chemical Society has a very active legislative group. And so, you know, I'm on the board of directors, and so we have actually advocated for a number of different policies and all of that. One of the challenges with the American Chemical Society, though, is there's very few professional societies that actually have a government charter. They are one of them that has a government charter. And so that still kind of limits kind of how much, you know, we can encourage people to go have these conversations, and we can go in and say, hey, we support this or don't support that. But to go in there and say, hey, we need more money, that's kind of a different aspect. Individuals can do that, and people get trained to be able to go in and go in and make those cases, because a lot of people are a little bit more shy about that. But I can tell you that there's two groups that legislators often listen to: seniors and you young folks in the front aisle here, because you're the age of a lot of the congressional staffers. And those are often the people that you're talking with. And for you to go in and have a voice, it makes a big difference. Yep. So you and seniors, those of us in the middle, they could care less.
Well, on behalf of the chemists and the chemical engineers in the room, thank you. Thank you for your
Appreciate it.
service to
Thank you
ACS
so
as
much.
well. Yeah.